In the final months of World War II, as Europe burned and borders dissolved into ruin, a handful of operations were carried out so far from official record that even their code names survived only through rumor. Unearthed fragments of sealed memos, missing convoy logs, and disavowed testimonies reveal a web of shadow missions buried beneath the noise of victory. They speak of unmarked trucks crossing the Black Forest, forgotten listening stations in frozen seas, and scientists spirited away under false flags. What remains are partial coordinates, redacted names, and questions that still divide intelligence agencies nearly 80 years later. This is the reconstruction of files never meant to be opened, the kind that history was built to forget. Chapter 1. The Vanished Convoy of Operation Harborage. In April 1945, the war in Europe was collapsing in real time. American armored divisions were pushing deep into the heart of Germany, cutting through the remnants of the Wehrmacht as Berlin awaited its inevitable fall. Yet within the chaos of retreat and surrender, one operation unfolded far from the public eye, Operation Harborage, a mission so secret that even within Allied command, only a handful of officers knew its true scope. The official records describe it as a coordinated effort by the US 6th Army Group to capture Nazi nuclear scientists and their research before the Soviets could reach them. But the paperwork ends abruptly, replaced by silence and a single line in an after-action report. Convoy lost, cause undetermined. The mission began on the night of April 23, 1945. A column of 12 unmarked trucks departed from the French town of Colmar, heading east into the Black Forest under heavy fog. The convoy was led by Lieutenant Colonel Robert H. Ellis of the 126th Engineer Battalion, under orders from a special OSS liaison attached to Chef headquarters. Their route, traced through surviving fragments of signal intercepts, took them along minor roads toward the industrial town of Tuttlingen, an area rumored to contain secret research facilities linked to Heereswaffenamt, the Army Weapons Office. Locals later claimed they saw the trucks pass through without headlights, guarded by men in American uniforms but speaking in German among themselves. By dawn, the convoy had vanished. Military police dispatched from Freiburg found no wreckage, no tracks beyond the tree line, and no evidence that the trucks had continued east. The official investigation, dated May 2nd, concluded with the phrase, "lost to enemy action," though no German units were operating in the region at that time. For decades, the incident remained buried within restricted archives, dismissed as a logistical miscommunication amid the fog of war. But in 1972, a retired engineer named Frank Mercer, formerly of the same battalion, came forward with a story that reopened the file. Mercer's testimony, recorded by journalist Alan Kruger for the Munich Inquiry Papers, described an alternate version of events. According to Mercer, Ellis had received a sealed envelope hours before departure, marked for command eyes only. Inside were revised coordinates that bypassed the known German research sites and directed the convoy toward an unlisted valley near Donaueschingen. The cargo, Mercer said, consisted of metallic containers roughly the size of coffins, each lined with lead and stenciled with radiation warnings in both English and German. The soldiers joked nervously about radioactive sausages, unaware of the true nature of what they carried. When the convoy reached the designated valley, Ellis ordered all men to establish a perimeter, while a small detachment drove the cargo deeper into the forest. Mercer recalled hearing a rhythmic humming that vibrated through the ground, unlike any generator or motor he had encountered. Hours later, a flash lit up the sky to the north, and a low-frequency sound rolled through the valley, followed by radio silence. By morning, the trucks were gone, all 12, along with the detachment. The remaining soldiers were ordered to regroup at a fallback point, where they were met by unidentified personnel in civilian clothes, fluent in both English and Russian, who collected their weapons and ordered immediate redeployment. Mercer never saw Colonel Ellis again. Declassified documents from the US National Archives, primarily fragments of OSS cable traffic, confirm that Operation Harborage's focus was nuclear research, specifically uranium enrichment and reactor experimentation. Among the captured sites was Haigerloch, where the Germans had constructed an experimental reactor known as the Uranmaschine BWE. Yet none of the original Haigerloch scientists, including Dr. Kurt Diebner and Karl Friedrich von Weizsäcker, ever mentioned a second reactor or a parallel research group evacuated in April 1945. However, An intercepted Soviet report dated August 1946, found in the archives of the Ministry of Atomic Energy, references an unidentified American recovery team that retrieved uranium cube assemblies and composite moderator materials near Donaueschingen, precisely where Mercer's story placed the vanished convoy. The most disturbing evidence surfaced decades later in 1991, when a classified memo titled Post-Harbourage Debriefing Summary was accidentally included in a declassification batch from the Department of Energy. The document, heavily redacted, referred to anomalous isotopic signatures inconsistent with known wartime reactor output, and cited contamination incidents among US personnel in Frankfurt during post-war analysis. A marginal note in pencil read simply, "Reactor components or something else?" The memo was swiftly withdrawn from public release, but not before copies circulated among independent researchers. One such researcher, Dr. Elise Vaughan, a historian specializing in Allied technical intelligence, pursued the case through interviews with descendants of OSS officers stationed in southern Germany. She uncovered a letter, dated 1947, written by a Major Alan Rees to his wife. "The Harbourage material isn't what we thought it was. The physicists are baffled. The readings are wrong, almost alive. They want to bury it under Nevada, forget it ever existed." The letter was postmarked from Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Further digging revealed that several crates from Operation Harbourage had been shipped under diplomatic cover to the US zone in Frankfurt, then quietly transferred to Le Havre for transport aboard the Liberty ship SS Dalton Victory. The ship's manifest listed classified technical equipment, but no corresponding cargo was ever logged at its destination port in Norfolk, Virginia. The Dalton Victory itself was lost in a storm on June 18, 1945, with all 62 crew members missing, a tragedy barely mentioned in naval records. No wreckage was recovered. German archives offer one final clue. A memorandum dated February 1945, signed by Reich Research Council member Dr. Gerhard Ritter, outlines a project named Schwarze Lichtquelle, black light source. The description matches no known German nuclear endeavor, but includes references to a self-sustaining energy field, utilizing fissile gradients. Ritter's document concludes with a chilling note: "Transfer to Harbourage convoy under direct SS supervision. Do not inform Speer's office. Whether Operation Harbourage successfully captured elements of this project remains unknown. What is clear is that a portion of its convoy, 12 unmarked trucks, their drivers, and their commanding officer, disappeared without a trace in the final days of the Third Reich. The incident was never listed among Allied losses, and no next-of-kin notifications were sent. Every surviving soldier connected to the mission was reassigned within weeks, their service records sealed under Section 22 of the Atomic Energy Act. To this day, hikers in the Black Forest occasionally stumble upon rusted vehicle fragments bearing American serial numbers, scorched and half-buried among the roots. Radiation surveys conducted near Donaueschingen in 1984 registered localized spikes of gamma activity, later attributed to natural geological variants. Yet the pattern matches precisely the route described by Frank Mercer. Local folklore speaks of the trucks that hum in the earth, heard on misty nights, when the wind passes through the valleys. Some historians argue that Operation Harbourage merely foreshadowed the desperate race to seize German science, the shadow war that would define the early Cold War. Others whisper that what vanished in that forest wasn't simply a convoy of trucks, but a fragment of technology humanity was never meant to recover. In official archives, the file remains closed, marked only with one word: incomplete. Chapter 2: Echoes of the Arctic Listening Posts. In the bitter cold of February 1951, a Norwegian Air Force patrol plane operating near the Svalbard archipelago intercepted an unexplained transmission, a shortwave signal pulsing on 17.3 MHz, repeating the sequence König X. The message was weak but persistent, cutting through atmospheric noise with eerie precision. NATO analysts in Oslo traced its source to somewhere near Franz Josef Land, deep within Soviet territorial waters. The incident was quietly logged as part of Project Aurora, a joint NATO-Canadian initiative to establish remote listening stations along the Arctic Circle, meant to monitor Soviet bomber routes and submarine traffic. Yet what the stations began recording in the following years had little to do with the Soviets at all. Aurora's first phase installed monitoring outposts across Greenland, northern Canada, and Norway. Each outpost consisted of prefabricated steel huts, long-range antenna arrays, and a skeleton crew of cryptologists and engineers. Station A3, perched on an ice ridge north of Hammerfest, was manned by 5 operators under Royal Air Force Command. Their duty logs from November 1952 show an anomalous series of transmissions received between 0200 and 2:30 hours every third night, faint Morse signals that began with Q12 and ended with an archaic Kriegsmarine call format not used since 1945. Operators dismissed them as atmospheric reflections or stray civilian signals, until one night the message arrived with a full header. König True Team to Berlin Command, awaiting return. The finding was classified immediately. No German naval network should have existed 6 years after the war's end. The Kriegsmarine call system had been dismantled by Allied codebreakers in May 1945. And yet, the Aurora logs documented at least 23 identical broadcasts over a span of 4 months, each growing stronger and clearer, as if the transmitter were moving closer. When Station A3 relayed the evidence to Shape headquarters in Paris, the response was terse. Cease broadcast monitoring. Secure tapes. Await inspection. 2 weeks later, the outpost was ordered abandoned due to unfavorable weather conditions, though climate records for that region show unbroken clear skies. By early 1953, similar reports emerged from other Aurora sites, first in Greenland, then northern Labrador. Operators described signals repeating fragmented German naval phrases, Unternehmenssiegel, Basisnull, Nordwind bereit. Several carried call signs corresponding to U-boats confirmed lost in the final months of the war. To cross-check, US Navy analysts reviewed declassified Kriegsmarine logs and found one match, U-977, a Type 7 submarine that had surrendered in Argentina months after Germany's surrender. The voice pattern embedded in one transmission, when filtered and analyzed, bore a 78% match to archived voice samples from U-977's radioman, Oberfunkmeister Hans Schäfer, a man who had died in 1964, decades before digital analysis existed. The Canadians took the report seriously enough to launch Operation Northern Sound in 1954, a joint Royal Canadian Air Force and US Navy expedition to trace the origin of the phantom signals. 3 ski-equipped C-47 aircraft departed from Thule Air Base, each fitted with prototype magnetic direction finding arrays. Only 2 returned. The third, call sign Raven 2, vanished somewhere over the Barents Sea. The crew's last transmission read, "Approaching source, receiving direct signal, metallic structures visible under ice, repeating pattern." The radio cut out mid-sentence. No wreckage was ever located. The incident was classified under loss due to atmospheric interference. The next year, a Soviet whaling vessel, Kurskaya Zvezda, reported drifting debris, aircraft panels marked with NATO insignia, near Alexandra Land, one of the most remote islands in Franz Josef Land. Soviet military divers recovered fragments of twisted aluminum, an American-made radio panel, and a section of an identification plate labeled Raven. According to a Soviet naval archive obtained after the Cold War, samples taken from the metal showed traces of residual radioactivity and non-standard alloy composition inconsistent with Western production. The samples were sealed under reference Object 512 and null. Meanwhile, intelligence intercepts from Soviet Polar Command revealed that they too were hearing the strange transmissions. Their code name for it was Project Siva 12Y, a KGB internal memo dated June 1955, later recovered from the Lubyanka archives, notes, transmissions utilize pre-war naval coding, frequency modulation unachievable with surviving German equipment, possible automated origin, recommend containment. Soviet expeditions sent to locate the source returned empty-handed, with one notable exception, a patrol report from 1956 describing an unmarked metallic installation partially submerged under ice, emitting residual heat signatures. The coordinates were redacted, but the description matches an uninhabited island 200 kilometers northeast of Novaya Zemlya, the same sector NATO analysts had identified as Zone Null. In 1957, after the signing of the Antarctic Treaty, both sides quietly removed Zone Null from all operational maps. Satellite reconnaissance from the 1960s shows a faint grid-like structure beneath the ice shelf, roughly 150 meters long, with symmetrical protrusions consistent with antennae or ventilation shafts. Curiously, the Soviet imagery was classified not under naval intelligence, but under radiological materials. By then, Aurora had been officially discontinued, its remaining Arctic stations dismantled or turned over to civilian meteorological use. Still, the signals did not stop. Amateur radio enthusiasts in Norway and Finland reported hearing the König broadcast well into the 1970s, though the transmission grew fainter and less regular. In 1981, a declassified NORAD memo noted a final detection of the same pattern by a Canadian early warning radar site in Alert, Nunavut. The signal ended with a new phrase never before recorded: "Command acknowledged, returning to base." Modern analysts have attempted to explain the mystery through atmospheric reflection or echo effects caused by ionospheric conditions unique to the Arctic. Yet these theories fail to account for the structured repetition of World War II-era codes, or the voice transmissions embedded within. Some researchers propose the existence of an automated relay, perhaps part of a forgotten Nazi weather station network. Others point to the possibility of a Soviet psychological operation designed to sow confusion during the early Cold War. None can explain why both sides chose to suppress all evidence. The last known reference to Project Aurora appears in a 1963 NATO intelligence annex labeled Obsolete Arctic Operations. Beneath the summary, a handwritten note reads, "Zone null remains off limits. No overflights. Maintain silence." The author's name has been blacked out. When declassified satellite surveys became public in the 1990s, the region was conspicuously absent from available imagery. Even modern digital mapping services display only an indistinct white blur. Decades later, environmental scientists studying climate change in the Arctic began encountering strange electromagnetic anomalies near the same coordinates. Instruments malfunctioned, GPS drifted unpredictably, and on certain nights, deep beneath the aurora, radio operators reported catching a faint pulse. 3 dots, pause, 1 dash, the same Morse signature documented in 1951. No official inquiry has ever acknowledged the pattern. No government claims responsibility. But among Cold War historians and intelligence archivists, the whispers persist. Somewhere beneath the polar ice, buried since the Reich's dying days, an automated transmitter still waits for orders from a command that ceased to exist 80 years ago. And sometimes, when conditions are right, it still answers. König the Fringe to Berlin Command, awaiting return. Chapter 3. The Prague Cipher and the Missing Reel. When US troops entered Prague on May 9, 1945, they found a city both liberated and fractured, its ministries looted, its archives burning. Amid the chaos, an OSS detachment led by Captain James T. Colburn was tasked with seizing German intelligence materials before the Soviet NKVD could reach them. Inside a requisitioned film studio on Barrandov Hill, Colburn's team discovered dozens of metal canisters, each labeled Project Mauerwerk, Project Masonry. The reels were packed alongside technical blueprints, Reich Security main office insignia, and correspondence bearing the signature of SS Gruppenführer Walter Schellenberg, Chief of Foreign Intelligence. Officially, the contents were classified as miscellaneous propaganda material. Unofficially, they became one of the most guarded and unexplained recoveries of the war's end. Each reel contained fragments of what appeared to be architectural studies, underground chambers, reinforced concrete structures, and diagrams annotated with both German and English text. The imagery was erratic, shadowy figures in lab coats, test footage of explosions, and scenes of what looked like hypnosis or sensory experiments conducted on prisoners. Film analysts at the OSS Frankfurt office catalogued the material as non-standard, noting that the emulsion stock was of a type manufactured by Agfa but treated with a proprietary chemical coating that produced severe eye strain during projection. After 2 screenings, the projectors reportedly failed, the film snapping mid-reel. The materials were crated and stored in a secured vault awaiting transfer to London. There, the paper trail ended. In 1964, nearly 20 years later, a single reel from Project Mauerwerk resurfaced during the defection of an East German intelligence officer known only by his alias, Victor L. He claimed to have obtained it from a former Stasi archivist in Leipzig, who had copied it for leverage. The reel was smuggled to the British sector of Berlin, where it came into the possession of MI6 asset Jonathan Hale. According to debriefing transcripts, Hale screened the film privately in a secure basement beneath the British Embassy. He described what he saw as a mosaic of deliberate confusion, a cipher made of images. The reel contained over 400 individual frames, each marked with coordinates, numbers, and handwritten notes in both Gothic script and English shorthand. Embedded in the frames were coded patterns resembling one-time pad sequences. Hale's analysis suggested that Project WWII might have served as an information carrier, a visual cipher encoded within film grain to hide data in plain sight. The technique, later known as steganography, would not be formally recognized for another decade, but what message the Nazis were hiding remained a mystery. Hale forwarded the reel to MI6 headquarters in London for decryption. The package arrived, but when archivists opened it, they found only an empty canister. The contents had been replaced with blank leader film. An internal memo dated October 1964 recorded the incident as probable theft, internal compromise. The matter was closed quietly. Hale was reassigned to Cyprus and later found dead in his flat, reportedly from carbon monoxide. Inhalation. Declassified British files released in the 1990s revealed fragments of correspondence between the Foreign Office and the US Army's Counterintelligence Corps. One document, marked Eyes Only, referred to the Prague Group, an alleged consortium of scientists, financiers, and intelligence officers from both Axis and Allied backgrounds who sought to preserve elements of wartime research for post-war use. The note made specific reference to a film cipher used to conceal personnel rosters and design schematics. Another document, recovered from the US National Archives, included a reference to a missing series of reels recovered from Prague, possibly connected to British intermediary involvement through SIS channels. The last line, handwritten, read, "Reel complete cipher, all others destroyed." The intrigue deepened in 1979, when a Czech historian, Dr. Petr Jankovic, discovered a batch of photographs in a disused police records building outside Brno. Among them was an image showing a conference room with both SS and British officers present, uniforms stripped of insignia, faces half obscured. The photograph was stamped with the same WWII project code. Chemical analysis dated the print to early 1945. Jankovic published his findings in a restricted academic journal before being killed in a car crash en route to Vienna. The negatives vanished from police custody 2 days later. His widow later reported that Czech state security officers confiscated all documents related to the film. By the 1980s, whispers of Project WWII had become a recurring rumor within European intelligence circles. A CIA cable from 1983, released under the Freedom of Information Act, references persistent reports of an unrecovered OSS film canister linked to post-war technology transfers via Czech intermediaries. The report warns that the footage may contain classified imagery pertaining to early human enhancement trials. The phrasing was vague, but attached to the cable was a typed summary of a 1945 OSS field interrogation in Prague, referencing unorthodox neurometric conditioning studies funded through the Reich Main Security Office and Siemens AG. The goal, it suggested, was to test perceptual disruption through audio-visual synchronization. In modern terms, it would be called psychological entrainment, the manipulation of human cognition through light and sound. To this day, no complete copy of Project WWII has ever been recovered. However, a single film fragment, approximately 6 seconds long, was anonymously delivered to the German Federal Archives in 1992. The footage shows a narrow corridor lined with concrete, ending in a steel door. Faint writing above the door reads Abteilung 13, Versuchsfeld, Department 13, Test Field. Behind the camera, someone can be heard breathing heavily. Then the image abruptly cuts to black. Digital analysis conducted in 2005 revealed faint flicker patterns between frames that encode a sequence of numbers. 50 degrees 04 H11 N, 14 24 31 E. Coordinates leading directly to the basement of a pre-war bank building in central Prague. When Czech authorities investigated, they found the structure sealed off by welded steel plates. No records of its wartime use exist. The location, now a government building, has been repeatedly surveyed with ground-penetrating radar, revealing an extensive substructure beneath the foundations. Multiple rooms, some filled with metallic debris, others empty voids. Officials dismissed the anomalies as collapsed war-era shelters, yet internal engineering documents show no such facilities were ever registered. Civilian contractors hired to reinforce. The lower levels in 2011 reported hearing unusual, echoing sounds, resembling faint rhythmic tapping emanating from behind the sealed walls. One final piece of evidence came from a letter written in 1947 by Dr. Wilhelm Finke, a former Siemens engineer captured during Operation Alsos. Addressed to an unknown recipient in Zurich, the letter states, "The Prague experiments achieved partial success. The cipher was delivered through the reel. If recovered, it will complete the sequence. Ensure it remains unseen, even by them." Intelligence. Historians interpret this as confirmation that the film contained more than mere imagery, possibly encoded blueprints or lists of individuals involved in wartime psychological research who later found positions in Western corporations and intelligence agencies. Every attempt to publicly discuss Project Mauerwerk has met with suppression or sudden disappearance of evidence. The few surviving witnesses describe identical symptoms, persistent headaches, auditory distortion, and recurring nightmares of flickering lights and narrow corridors. Archivists who handled the original reels in 1945 were reportedly hospitalized for retinal damage. Whether the film was experimental propaganda, early psychological warfare research, or something more cryptic remains uncertain. What endures are fragments, a 6-second reel, a dead defector coordinates that lead nowhere, and a cipher that no one can complete. Somewhere in the sealed vaults beneath Prague, Mauerwerk waits, a message carved in light and shadow, encoded by those who knew their empire was dying, yet refused to let its knowledge perish with it. The reel completes the cipher, but the cipher remains incomplete. Chapter 4. Operation Valkyrie's Shadow Network. The July 20th, 1944, attempt on Adolf Hitler's life is remembered as the last great act of defiance from within the German officer corps, a desperate gamble by men who believed they could save their country from destruction. Yet buried within the aftermath of the failed plot was another, quieter network, one that did not end with the executions at Plötzensee prison. Documents unearthed from the Bundesarchiv in the late 1990s reveal a continuation plan codenamed Wotan Directive, conceived by surviving conspirators of Operation Valkyrie and preserved through the collapse of the Reich. What began as an internal resistance movement evolved into a clandestine intelligence web that extended far beyond. 1945, into the rubble of post-war Europe and the earliest days of the Cold War. The first trace of the Wotan Directive appears in a decrypted Abwehr transmission dated September 1944, sent from a field office in Salzburg to an unknown recipient in neutral Switzerland. The message, signed Ritter von T, reads, "Directive remains active. Secure assets for Phase 2. Await signal through Bern Channel." At the time, Allied cryptologists believed it referred to scattered Wehrmacht remnants preparing for guerrilla resistance. But the term Phase 2 resurfaced in American Counterintelligence Corps, CIC, intercepts during the Allied occupation, attached to the movements of high-ranking German officers traveling under false identities to Italy and Spain. Among them was Colonel Ernst Rupp, formerly of the Army Personnel Office, later confirmed as one of the Valkyrie conspirators who had escaped the July Purge. According to a 1946 CIC report marked "Top Secret, not for release to British authorities," Rupp acted as liaison for a covert evacuation pipeline moving senior Wehrmacht SS and Abwehr personnel from Austria through the Tyrol into neutral territories. The operation utilized Red Cross documents and Vatican travel papers arranged by intermediaries in Rome. This network, the report claims, was not merely a Nazi escape route. It was a continuation of the Valkyrie plan under new terms. Its purpose, to preserve Germany's military and scientific infrastructure under Allied oversight, ready to re-emerge when the geopolitical landscape allowed. The network's internal codeword was Wotan, a deliberate nod to the old Germanic god of knowledge and war, but its structure resembled something closer to a shadow government in exile. American interrogators noticed an unsettling pattern. Many captured officers, even those with no connection to Valkyrie, carried small cipher notebooks containing identical numerical tables. When cross-referenced, the sequences formed partial geographic coordinates across Western Europe, former Wehrmacht depots, industrial sites, and radio outposts. Analysts realized these numbers were not escape routes, but relay points for a communications network operating independently of Allied control. In December 1946, OSS successor agencies traced one signal to a transmitter hidden inside a monastery near Innsbruck. The message intercepted that night was brief, transmitted in obsolete military code. Wotan still watches. Phase 2 proceeding. British intelligence grew concerned. The MI6 Berlin station feared that elements of the former Abwehr had embedded themselves within the emerging intelligence apparatuses of both East and West Germany. A 1950 memorandum from the Foreign Office warned of potential Wotan infiltration in early NATO security structures. Its author, identified only as CP, claimed that certain Western officers, veterans of the Wehrmacht, general staff, were deliberately recruited to advise on Soviet counterintelligence under programs like Operation Gladio and Stay Behind. Among these officers were at least 3 names matching Valkyrie associates previously listed as executed. In one case, the body of a supposed conspirator had been buried under a false name at Tegel Cemetery. The exhumed remains later identified as a different man entirely. Parallel. Records from the newly formed Bundesnachrichtendienst, BND, show that during the 1950s, numerous intelligence consultants with unverifiable wartime service backgrounds entered the agency through American sponsorship. Declassified CIA records confirm the existence of Project Sunrise, an initiative that recruited German military specialists for Cold War operations. Buried within those files is a single reference to Wotan advisors, cleared for continuation of Valkyrie assets. Whether this label referred to actual individuals or merely code remains uncertain. But in 1952, a Bundesarchiv logbook recorded the arrival of an anonymous donation. 6 reels of microfilm labeled Valkyrie continuation papers. The sigh. Reels were sealed immediately under Section 15 and never viewed again. A partial inventory list leaked decades later indicates the microfilm contained directives outlining post-war continuity measures, including temporary collaboration with Western intelligence and creation of autonomous European defense networks independent of direct US control. The language mirrors early NATO planning documents but predates them by several years. This suggests the Wotan network may have exerted influence on the formation of Western defense policies from within, not as traitors, but as ideological survivors seeking to shape the new Europe in their image. By 1956, NATO security officers in Brussels discovered an unauthorized communications circuit transmitting encrypted bursts using modified Enigma coding. The message header, WD72. Its content remains classified, but a decrypted fragment reportedly mentioned reactivation of dormant units and civil transition under Atlantic protection. Soon after, NATO quietly implemented an internal sweep. Several intelligence officers were dismissed without explanation, and their personnel files sealed indefinitely. In the same year, a meeting of former Wehrmacht officers in Bonn was raided by the BKA, who confiscated documents detailing parallel command chains for emergency mobilization. None of the men were charged. The Wotan legend might have ended there, a convenient myth absorbed by post-war paranoia, if not for one more discovery. In 1989, as the Berlin Wall fell, Stasi archives revealed a file labeled Valkyrie Nachfolger, Valkyrie Successors. Inside were transcripts of intercepted Western radio traffic from 1952 to 1958, all referencing Directive Wotan. One entry stood out, a transmission from a NATO field station in Verona, Italy, stating, "Directive confirmed by Allied section. Continue embedded operations until recall order." The Stasi analysts, baffled, assumed it was a code name for Gladio operations. But linguists later noted that the phrasing mirrored original Valkyrie command language used in 1944. Surviving members of post-war intelligence communities have long denied knowledge of the directive. Yet interviews conducted in 2003 with retired CIA liaison officer Richard Dunlap tell a different story. Dunlap recalled a briefing at SHAPE headquarters in 1952, where a German delegation presented operational plans that eerily resembled pre-surrender resistance strategies. They claimed it was contingency planning for Soviet invasion, he said, but it was structured like an internal coup. They called it Wotan. Dunlap described the proposal as too organized, too ready, suggesting that the groundwork had been laid long before the Cold War began. Today, Fragments of the directive still appear in obscure archival corners. Letters coded in obsolete German military abbreviations, orders issued from non-existent offices, and financial ledgers showing unexplained transfers through Swiss banks tied to early European political foundations. Some historians believe that the network evolved into a quiet consortium of former officers who helped guide West Germany's rearmament and NATO integration under the guise of loyal partnership. Others suspect that Wotan remained active as an ideological remnant, shaping covert policy in the shadows of democratic institutions. What began as an act of resistance to tyranny may have ended as an invisible state within the state, born from Valkyrie's ashes, surviving both Allied victory and Soviet collapse. Whether the Wotan Directive truly guided post-war Europe or merely haunted it, the record remains ambiguous, but every file that mentions it carries the same closing annotation, scrawled in faded ink. Directive remains in effect until recall order received. None ever was. Chapter 5. The Siberian Vault of Operation Paperclip. In the winter of 1946, while American intelligence agencies were racing to secure German scientific assets under the now infamous Operation Paperclip, a parallel effort was unfolding across the ruins of Eastern Europe. The Soviets, determined not to be outmatched by their Western counterparts, launched a mirror program known internally as Operacja Zaszczyta, Operation Protection. Its objective was simple but ruthless: seize, by any means necessary, the scientists, blueprints, and prototypes that had escaped Allied occupation. What remains of that effort today exists only in fragments of redacted KGB memoranda and testimonies from defectors. Together, they point to a single destination, a classified facility buried beneath the permafrost of northern Siberia, known only as Object 12B. The first mention of Object 12B appears in a Soviet General Staff Directive dated December 29, 1946. The order, signed by Marshal Zhukov himself, authorized the transport of captured technical materials from the Thuringian sector to a secure installation under the supervision of the 9th Directorate. Among the cargo were crates labeled in German, containing what appeared to be jet turbine components, liquid fuel propellant systems, and a sealed lead container marked Nicht öffnen, Gefahr. Soviet engineers at the time referred to it simply as the Black Cargo. Within months, train convoys loaded with dismantled machinery departed from Germany through Poland and onward to Novosibirsk, their manifest classified as mining equipment. From there, the shipments vanished into the wilderness. Surviving railway logs indicate that the cargo's final destination lay north of the Yenisei River, near a remote settlement called Tura, a location accessible only by air or ice road for part of the year. Local workers later reported construction activity involving hundreds of forced laborers and German-speaking engineers under NKVD guard. The site was officially designated a meteorological research complex, but aerial reconnaissance conducted by US Air Force in 1953 recorded a vast grid of structures buried beneath the snow, including a central shaft descending an estimated 200 meters. The analysts noted unusual heat signatures despite ambient temperatures below -40 degrees Celsius. The file was stamped eyes only, strategic significance unclear. In 1954, a report from the Soviet Ministry of Medium, Machine Building, the department overseeing nuclear weapons development, referenced experiments utilizing captured reactor, assemblies of German origin at Object 12B. Western intelligence initially assumed this referred to remnants of Heisenberg's failed uranium reactor experiments, but in 1974, a defected Soviet physicist named Dr. Sergei Antonov provided a different story. In interviews conducted under CIA debrief protocol, Antonov described 12B as a vault built to contain something that could not be reproduced. According to him, the core of the installation housed an autonomous power system derived from confiscated technology codenamed Projekt Schwarze Lichtquelle, the same name appearing in a lost German memorandum tied to Operation Harborage. Antonov claimed the vault's power readings fluctuated even when disconnected from external generators. He called it a breathing engine, a device that emitted a low-frequency hum capable of interfering with nearby instruments. It was not a reactor, he said. It did not burn. It pulsed. His team, composed of both German and Russian specialists, was tasked with disassembling the mechanism, but all attempts failed. Within 2 weeks of initial testing, 4 engineers fell ill with severe neurological symptoms: disorientation, headaches, and photophobia. Their medical records were sealed under the classification neural contamination. Shortly thereafter, Antonov's superior ordered all research suspended, and the chamber sealed under concrete. The CIA, skeptical of Antonov's account, cross-referenced his testimony with satellite reconnaissance. High-resolution imagery taken in 1977 confirmed the existence of an anomalous heat source near Tura, consistent with buried infrastructure. A classified DIA briefing described it as a facility exhibiting continuous internal energy output with no visible fuel or exhaust signature. Analysts proposed geothermal activity, but local geological surveys recorded no volcanic presence within 500 kilometers. Moreover, intercepted, Soviet logistics manifests revealed regular deliveries of lead shielding and oxygen canisters to the site. Odd materials for a supposed power plant. Further corroboration emerged from declassified Soviet economic reports. Between 1955 and 1962, the 9th Directorate requested allocations of silver, cadmium, and enriched beryllium in quantities exceeding typical nuclear research requirements. A KGB field memo from 1960 described the presence of technological artifacts of non-reproducible design. Most were believed to have originated from underground facilities in Thuringia, recovered by Soviet forces in the war's final weeks. Curiously, a US Army Signal Corps report from the same period mentions unconfirmed intelligence regarding a Soviet experimental reactor powered by captured German devices, possibly linked to Thuringian site Haigerloch B. That designation never existed officially. In 1982, Swedish geophysicists conducting magnetometer surveys near the Arctic Circle detected a faint but persistent electromagnetic anomaly emanating from the region, corresponding to Object 12b. When they published their findings, the Soviet Academy of Sciences immediately denied the data's validity, citing instrument error due to auroral interference. But within a year, the research team's lead scientist, Dr. Niels Ekström, vanished while on a return expedition. His journal, recovered from his camp, contained a single entry written the night before he disappeared. The sound is everywhere, below the ice, within the air. It is not mechanical. During the 1990s, as the Soviet Union dissolved, fragments of 12B's records surfaced in the black market trade of declassified intelligence. A retired GRU officer in Minsk attempted to sell microfilm reels marked Object Archive, 12B Protocol, 1949-1958 holes to Western journalists. The footage reportedly showed underground corridors filled with rows of metallic containers bearing both Cyrillic and Gothic script, illuminated by a pale bluish glow. Before verification could occur, the seller was found dead in his apartment, the reels missing. Interpol traced the buyer to a defunct research foundation in Zurich with alleged ties to former paperclip scientists. The investigation was dropped for jurisdictional complications. In 2002, a Russian environmental team conducting permafrost studies near Evenkia stumbled upon sealed entrances resembling ventilation shafts, each stamped with fading Soviet radiation symbols. The site was briefly photographed before Federal Security Service personnel confiscated all equipment and ordered the area closed. A month later, an unmarked aircraft was seen landing on an improvised airstrip nearby. Satellite footage captured cargo being loaded aboard, large metallic cylinders reminiscent of storage tanks. The flight's registration number was falsified. The coordinates of the airstrip were subsequently removed from public satellite maps. Even in modern Russian military databases, Object 12B remains listed only as an obsolete meteorological outpost. Yet interviews with local pilots tell of a restricted airspace, a square of sky no civilian aircraft may cross. Hunters in the region speak of nights when the ground seems to hum faintly, a vibration that rises and falls with the wind. Some claim that when snowstorms roll in from the east, the ice itself glows faintly blue beneath the drifts. Officials attribute these stories to atmospheric ionization. No one investigates. The mystery of Object 12B embodies the shadow war of science that followed the Second World War, a race not only for weapons, but for control of the unknown. While Operation Paperclip brought hundreds of German scientists to America, Operacja Zaszczyta seized what could not be explained. What they found in Thuringia and buried in Siberia may have been the remnants of an experiment begun under the dying Reich, a machine that defied classification, a source of energy no one could replicate or destroy. Its purpose remains locked beneath layers of ice, concrete, and silence. If Antonov's testimony is to be believed, Object 12B was never decommissioned. The last entry in his notes, dated April 3, 1958, reads, "The chamber breathes slower now, but it does not die. They have buried it alive." And somewhere in the endless Siberian night, where the compass spins and radios fail, a faint vibration still echoes from deep within the frozen earth. A pulse from a forgotten vault, where history itself continues to hum in the dark. In the decades since the last veterans of the war faded into memory, the archives have not gone quiet. Each year, another sealed folder is unclassified, another microfilm reel recovered from forgotten depots, another voice emerges on a degraded tape, whispering of experiments that never ended, operations that never received their recall orders, and directives that outlived the nations that wrote them. For every confirmed record, a dozen vanish under national security exceptions. The deeper historians dig, the more they uncover a network of continuity that blurs the line between wartime and peace, between enemy and ally. Somewhere beneath the layers of secrecy, the question remains unanswered. Were these fragments merely the ghosts of war, or the foundations of the world that replaced it? The archives are not finished speaking. We have only begun to listen.